Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Good morning. My name is Evan McLean. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's talk in our research series on human-animal relationships. And I have the privilege of introducing our speaker today, our first of actually two speakers today. I'm going to introduce Dr. Martin Reimann. Martin is an associate professor here in the Eller College of Management at the University of Arizona. Martin also has appointments in psychology, cognitive science, and veterinary medicine. He did his doctoral work in psychology at the University of Southern California and has also completed advanced degrees in marketing in Germany. Very broadly, Martin's research explores emotional and motivational aspects of consumer behavior, including our relationships with people, products, and pets, among other things that do not start with the letter P, but I think we'll probably hear about the pets piece of things today. Today I know he's going to be telling us about some of his work on how thinking of pets buffers against psychological pain. So with that, welcome Martin, and I'll hand things over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Evan. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. It's a pleasure to present today, and I'll co-present with Christoph Fuller. Christoph is a fourth-year PhD student at the Eller College of Management, and we have started working together on this project, and Christoph is driving now the empirical investigation, and so I'll take away the front part of the presentation, and then Christoph will dive into the empirics, and we agree to take questions at the end of the talk. So this project, together with Evan and Christoph, looks at consumer relationships with animals, and we're introducing a new way and look at companion animals, which we call animals as guardians. And this talk will focus on this idea why pets may be more like parents than partners. So as many of you know from the literature, psychological pain is highly prevalent across the population. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 1 of 5 adults experience mental health-related issues at one point or more points in their lives. There's anxiety and depression among the population. This, of course, has only gone up during the pandemic years. And this is not only the case for adults, but also for young people, and which is particularly concerning that a large percentage of students have been diagnosed with mental health conditions, which may actually be also correlated to dropout of school or even juvenile delinquency. So we focus in this research on psychological pain, and we borrow a definition from Reimann, who defined pain, psychological pain, as a negative introspective experience resulting from adverse life events, such as embarrassing situations, social rejections, and the loss of a loved one. And here you see this is strongly related to this trend we've observed in the literature, where especially younger adults, but also teens and children may experience psychological pain in these forms, stemming from, for example, from social media also. So consumers are reluctant to talk to other people about their painful experiences. A staggering 70% of consumers with mental illnesses do not receive any mental health treatment from healthcare staff. So they're in this alone. Over 50% of consumers do not feel comfortable talking to people, including family members and friends, about their psychological well-being. And 90% of consumers between the ages of 18 and 24 would not reveal a mental health issue to a family or friends, including their parents. So instead, consumers often turn to companion animals, hoping that they can ease their pain. And this is how we started this project, Evan and I, several years ago, where we observed during the COVID pandemic this amazing increase in animal ownership across the United States, actually globally also. And here you see, since the late 80s, it's only going up on average. So relationships to both peoples and animals have been found to be pain mitigating. There's quite a bit of research in this area. For interpersonal relationships, there is a long line of research that looks at positive associations between social support and psychological well-being. The work of Naomi Eisenberger shows that holding a beloved person's hand or even viewing a picture of them, this is research by Masters and others, reduces pain more than engaging, say, in a distracting control activity such as holding or viewing an object. And similar results have been found for friends, but also for experimenters and even for strangers. So human relationships do work for pain mitigation, as do human-animal relationships. So work on, and this is early work from the 80s, has shown that survivorship among coronary artery disease patients was found to be higher among those with animals. People have also reported less anxiety after petting a dog compared to a baseline decision. This is work from the 80s, and just as an aside, at the University of Arizona, at the College of Veterinary Medicine, several researchers built on these findings and have exciting new findings in this area. And similar results have been found for reduced stress, for negative affect, and overall negative physiological arousal. So again, here also human to animal relationships work. But what is lacking in the literature, and this is where we come in, is how do these two types of relationships, companion relationships, compare to each other in terms of pain mitigation? Are they created equal? Is one better than the other? And then for what type? And we also asked, do animals and humans contribute comparatively to our psychological well-being, or does one have a pain mitigating advantage over the other? So there have been two major themes in the consumer behavioral literature. In the field of marketing and consumer behavior, there is a stream also going back to the 80s that look at the particulars of consumer behavior relationship. Much of this work has been done in the qualitative domain, and very interesting conceptual work has also been proposed. And here, the authors often view animals as objects. They call them possessions, toy or ornaments, and then when it comes to utility animals, they view them or define them as, of course, livestock products, or of course even food. And so in general, it's more about an object relationship as opposed to a being. Then a little bit later, animals were increasingly recognized as companions, and I think this is a big link to the work that has been forwarded in human-animal relationship in the veterinary medicine domain. So in consumer behavior, authors have recognized animals as relationship partners, even to the extent that they are siblings, soulmates, and close friends, perhaps even children, and for sure family members. So those are some of the roles on how people in the prior literature have understood companion animals. So the current assumption in the literature is that at best, animals offer equivalent psychological benefits as humans, stemming from the fact that they are close relationship partners, children, companions, friends. So Holbrook in his work, a qualitative work in this area, has said animal companions are basically people. Consumers and their animal companions are capable of sharing bonds of intimacy that approach or even equal those they share with other humans, is what Elizabeth Hirschman has done in her dissertation work back in the 90s. And again here, Holbrook saying consumers bond with their animal companions in ways that resemble human relationships. So when we look at the literature, it's all about interpersonal and animal relationships being equal or less equal than so companion animals are less equal, or at least equal, than interpersonal relationship, but not more, according to these authors. So here I think would like to make an important conceptual, but then later, as Christoph will show you, empirical contribution to the literature. So we do challenge this assumption by showing that the psychological value of animals exceeds or can exceed in certain instances those of most humans. So again, here are the three different viewpoints from the literature. Early work, animals as objects. So less effective, say, at pain mitigation than humans are. Then a little bit later work, animals as companions. So less or equally effective. And now we say animals can be more effective in certain situations, especially if they're viewed as caregivers or emotional guardians. So we have a couple of hypotheses which we would like to offer. So our first hypothesis is that animals are more effective at reducing psychological pain than human companions are. They are more effective at reducing psychological pain than especially partners and friends, which we would define as companions, but not more effective than parents as guardians. And animals are more effective at reducing psychological pain than humans because their love is perceived as unconditional. So we focus on this mediating variable of unconditional love, which we very painstakingly have divided into different aspects of it. We did both qualitative and quantitative work to come up with a scale of unconditional love so we can assess and directly measure companion related love. And then finally, hypothesis 4, when consumers start to perceive animal love to be conditional, animals and humans are equally effective at reducing their psychological pain. So 4 hypotheses. So that's the front end, that's the conceptualization. And now I would like to hand over to Christoph, who has done some amazing empirical work in this space and build on the work that Evan and I started, and has much more now to offer.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. So I'm going to explain a little bit of our empirical work that we did. And we tested our theorizing in a series of studies, mainly experiments. But as Martin said, we also did some interviews, some qualitative work, and also a rather field experiment on Facebook. But for now, let's focus on study 1. So in this study, we were interested in testing our main effect. Are animals more effective at reducing psychological pain than humans? And this is how the study procedure looked like. We had participants first write about a psychological painful experience in their life. Some participants wrote about a time when they lost a loved one, for example. Others wrote about a time when they faced financial hardship. Others wrote about an embarrassing situation. So there were many different pain essays. And then after this writing task, we had participants rate their level of psychological pain using this well-established measure. It includes 6 facial expressions from the far left, meaning no pain or low pain, and to the far right, meaning extreme pain. And after we called this measure pain T1, and after this pain T1 measure, we randomly assigned participants to one of 3 conditions. We had the animal companion condition, where we asked participants to write about an animal they love. Then we had the human companion condition, where participants write about a person they love. And then we also had a control condition, where participants completed a distraction activity. In this case, it was an anagram task. And after this manipulation, we measured participants' psychological pain again. This time we called it pain T2, and the measure was exactly the same as in T1. And the idea here was we wanted to know in which of these 3 conditions was the pain reduction from T1 to T2 the greatest. And as predicted, we found that the pain reduction was the greatest in the animal condition. And importantly, it was statistically significantly different from both the human condition and also the control condition. So that told us that animals might have a pain mitigating advantage over humans and over a distraction activity. Now, in this study, we also coded some of the responses afterwards. And specifically, we were interested in whether the type of animal that participants wrote about mattered, whether there were statistically significant differences. And we also coded the type of human relationships that participants wrote about. For animals, we didn't really found statistically significant differences, but honestly, 90% of the participants wrote either about a dog or a cat, and then there were around 5% who wrote about a hamster, a chinchilla. I think we had guinea pigs, and then there were 2 or 3 participants who wrote about a horse. But as I said, we didn't find any differences there. The interesting part here was that there were huge differences between human relationships. So we wanted to compare the pain mitigating effect of animals to that of different types of humans. And what we find is that animals were more effective at reducing psychological pain than partners, children, and friends, but no more than parents. So this is first empirical evidence for our second hypothesis, that animals are more effective than these more companion-like humans, but not more effective than parents, which are considered as our primary caregivers. So this finding was super interesting to us. So we wanted to follow up. We wanted to test it in another study. So we ran study 2, where we manipulated the type of companion within subjects. The general idea here was similar to study 1. We had participants write about a psychological painful experience in their life. Then they rated their initial pain using the same scale. And afterwards, participants thought of a series of different companion types. So this was within subjects. In the animal condition, participants thought of a close animal. In the parent condition, participants thought of a close parent. And in the friend condition, participants thought about a close friend. And after each type of companion, participants rated their psychological pain again. And if I remember correctly, the order of the conditions were randomized. So it was not always animal first, parent second, friend third. Sometimes it was parent first, sometimes it was friend first. So the order was randomized. Similar to our first study, we found that animals were again more effective at reducing psychological pain compared to friends, but they were equally effective compared to parents. So this was an additional evidence for our second hypothesis, that animals are more like the psychological value of animals is more like those of caregivers rather than companions. All right. Next, we wanted to test our proposed mechanism. And as Martin said, we hypothesized that consumers perceive animal love as more unconditional or less conditional than human love. And this is why consumers feel better after interacting with their furry companions as compared to their human companions. Now, we define unconditional love as a type of love that is not based on any conditions or limitations. And we did some qualitative work here, which I'm going to show in a little bit. We ran some interviews. And what we found is that a lot of consumers describe unconditional love as one that is non-judgmental, one that is selfless, and one that is non-possessive. And we hypothesized that consumers would associate these 3 characteristics more with animals than humans. Now, to be clear, we don't say that consumers perceive animals as completely non-judgmental, completely selfless, and completely non-possessive. We're just saying that consumers perceive animals as less judgmental, less selfish, and less possessive than other people. Now, this was the qualitative work that we were talking about. So what we did is we ran interviews with participants of a dog therapy session. In this case, we had 31 participants. Some of you might know we have the dog days with the dean going on every Wednesday here on campus from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So we just went there and asked participants after they came out of the dog days whether they would give us some information on how they would describe the love that they received from the animals there. They usually have around 2 to 3, or sometimes 4 emotional support animals there. And we found that participants described animal love, 90% of them described animal love as non-judgmental. Around 36% described animal love as selfless, and 13% described it as non-possessive. So that's how we came up with these 3 different dimensions for perceptions of unconditional love. Now, based on the results of study 3A, we wanted to come up with a scale for measuring perceptions of unconditional love, because ultimately we wanted to test whether perceived unconditional love mediates our focal effect from companion type, animal versus human, to pain reduction. And so we had an initial item pool. We had a total of 12 items here. We had 4 items for each dimension. So we had 4 items for non-judgmentalness, 4 items for selflessness, and 4 items for non-possessiveness. And in order to refine our scale, we conducted a large-scale survey among pet owners. So we had a total of 2,831 pet owners. And in this survey, participants just wrote about an animal they love, and then we gave them this scale, and they rated their animal based on these different dimensions. Once we got back the results, we wanted to refine our scale a little bit. So what we did is we looked at the reliability of the scale. It looked pretty good. And then we also ran a first factor analysis. In this case, it was an exploratory factor analysis. And we found that most of the items loaded highly on their intended dimensions. There were some items that also cross-loaded to other dimensions. So we got rid of those items. But eventually, we had a final unconditional love scale, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. So this was study 3B. In study 3C, we were finally ready to test whether perceptions of unconditional love mediate our effect. So the procedure here was very, very similar to our previous studies. Participants wrote about a psychological painful experience in their life. They rated their psychological pain in T1. And this time, we only had 2 conditions. We had an animal companion condition where participants wrote about an animal they love. And then we had a human companion condition where participants wrote about a person they love. They measured their pain in T1 again. And then the critical part here is this final unconditional love scale at the end. So here we have a reliability statistic. So Cronbach's alpha was 0.89, so highly reliable. We did another factor analysis as well. This time we set the number of factors to 3 beforehand, because we know we have these 3 dimensions. And again, the items of our final scale loaded highly onto their intended dimensions, but did not load onto dimensions that were not supposed to load on. All right, so here's our final unconditional love scale. Let me give you some time to read over the items, just in case if you have any questions. But this time we had our final unconditional love scale has 2 items for non-judgmentalness, 3 items for selflessness, and 3 items for non-possessiveness. All right, and then, as I said, we tested for mediation. This was our final statistical analysis that we did in this study. And as predicted, we found that perceptions of unconditional love mediated our focal effect. So participants perceived that the love that they receive from animals as more unconditional than the love that they receive from humans. And higher perceptions of unconditional love were also associated with a higher pain reduction. So we got this nice little mediation effect here. All right. In study 4, we didn't want to measure we didn't want to measure unconditional love. This time we wanted to manipulate it to see whether we get some process by moderation evidence for our proposed mechanism. And here the study procedure was a little bit more complex. The general idea was the same. Participants wrote about a painful experience in their life. They rated their pain in T1, but then we had 4 different conditions. The 2 conditions on the left-hand side were identical to the conditions in our studies before. Participants wrote about either an animal or a person they love. But then the conditions on the right-hand side, we, in addition to manipulating the companion type, we also manipulated the conditionality of the relationship. And the way we did this is by giving participants a news article that they had to read. And this is how the news article looked like. So on the left-hand side, we have the news article for the animal condition, where participants read about a recent research finding where scientists have proved that pets judge humans based on their past experiences. And then we had the equivalent in the human condition. Scientists proved that people judge other humans based on their past experiences. And our prediction was that when participants read about humans being judgmental, this should not have a big impact on them, because when we think about interpersonal relationship, we already think about like humans are a little bit judgmental by nature. Whereas for pets or animals in general, we don't really think about them as being judgmental. But once we read about this scientific finding that pets or animals do indeed judge us, then this should have a higher impact on us. And our prediction was that when participants see this manipulation, the effect between animals and humans should go away. And this is exactly what we found. So on the left-hand side, we see the conditions where the conditionality manipulation was absent, so was not present, and we could replicate our findings. Animals were more effective at reducing psychological pain than humans. However, when participants were exposed to this news article that spoke about the conditional nature of the relationships to participants' companions, there was no longer a statistically significant difference between the animal and the human conditions. And as you can see, the blue line is a little bit steeper than the green line. So the conditionality of love manipulation had a higher impact in the animal condition as compared to the human condition. And the effect was no longer there. So the animals and humans were equally effective at reducing psychological pain. All right. Now, in our last study, we wanted to see whether our main effect or a focal effect also generalizes to different contexts. So in other words, we wanted to test the external validity of our theorizing. So here we chose psychotherapy as a context, and we did what is called A/B test, or it's also called split testing on Facebook. So in this study, we had 2 versions of an advertisement. Both advertisements featured therapy sessions. The only difference between the 2 was that in the animal condition, participants or Facebook users read that they would be accompanied by trained animals, whereas in the human condition, Facebook users read that they would be accompanied by traditional human therapists. And we wanted to know which of the 2 ads would participants be more likely to click on. So here our dependent measure was click-through rate. We found that more Facebook users were clicking on the advertisement that featured animal therapy sessions as compared to the advertisement that featured human therapy sessions. So this was additional evidence that the consumers would be more likely to go to a therapy session, or would be more interested in, at least, to go to a therapy session when there are animals involved, as compared to when you have this traditional therapy session just with human therapists. Now, we also wanted to validate these advertisements in the lab, because our focal construct is psychological pain. and click-through rate is not really a measure for psychological pain. So what we did in study 5B, we had a very similar design as before. Participants wrote about a psychological painful experience in their life. They rated their psychological pain in T1. But then the difference here is that participants didn't write about an animal or a person they love. Instead, we gave them these two advertisements and asked them to imagine they would participate in the therapy sessions. And then after this manipulation, we asked them how much psychological pain they think they would feel after participating in these therapy sessions. And similar to our previous findings, we found that participants anticipated a higher pain reduction in the animal companion condition. So when they imagined that they would participate in a therapy session with animals, as compared to when imagining they would participate in a therapy session with just humans. Right now, we also would like to, or we are in the progress of also testing whether our effect holds when participants actually interact with real animals, because so far they only thought about animals or wrote about animals, or they saw an advertisement with animals. Now we're running, in the next 2 weeks, we're running another study where participants actually interact with an animal. And then as a control, we let them interact with a fellow student. So it will be students. And we want to see if our effect holds, which would be an additional test to our external validity here. All right, so what can we learn from our research? I think it's not a surprise when I say that mental health issues are growing, not only in the United States, but also globally. There have been recent events that have contributed to this problem, like, for example, the pandemic, but also wars or inflation. And when you look at what mental health experts often recommend, is they often recommend talking to family or friends, or in more severe cases, going to a human therapist. Now, in the beginning of the presentation, we heard that a lot of consumers are hesitant or reluctant to talk about their psychological well-being. So this is how we come into place. We want to test animals as a promising alternative to, or human-animal relationships as a promising alternative to interpersonal relationships. And as we have shown, human-animal relationships are not only a promising alternative, oftentimes they're even a superior alternative to interpersonal relationships. Now, in summary, we find, or we try to make the case that consumers no longer view animals as mere companions to be fed, bred, and taken care of. Instead, consumers attribute characteristics to animals that are more similar to those of caregivers or emotional guardians, including A, increased pain relief, B, perceptions of unconditional love, and C, psychological similarity to parents. So these are the 3 dimensions, or the 3 reasons why we're trying to reconceptualize this role of animals from being mere companions to being caregivers or emotional guardians. With these findings, we contribute to several streams of literature. So within consumer research, we challenge this assumption that animal companions are basically people that Martin was talking about. We find that a lot of the times the psychological value of animals exceeds that of most humans. So we challenge this animal companion equals human companion assumption. As I said, we also try to reconceptualize animals as caregivers and emotional guardians rather than being mere companions. So in the beginning, we heard that consumer research has often compared animals to, say, partners or friends or siblings. We showed that the psychological value of animals is more similar to those of caregivers, in this case, parents. So this is why we're trying to make this case. And then finally, our third contribution here is that we show that unconditional love is a desired and pain-relieving form of love that goes beyond the non-judgmental nature of companions. There has been a huge theoretical debate whether unconditional love should actually be desired. And we showed that it should, because you feel better after interacting with a companion that provides unconditional love to you as compared to a companion that is more conditional. And in consumer research, there has also been a great interest in this concept of unconditional love, but none of this research has ever really defined this construct and looked at the different dimensions. So that's another contribution that we make. We do all this conceptual work to show that unconditional love consists of 3 dimensions: non-judgmentalness, selflessness, and non-possessiveness. In terms of substantive implications, we hope to contribute to this, again, controversial topic of using animals as emotional support figures. I'm sure you all know in many countries, animals are still legally defined as property or possessions. We think that's a burden, because a lot of consumers don't really see, and companies don't really see the value of animals as for emotional support purposes. And then also, it's still a controversial topic to use animals, in particular emotional support animals, in public settings, like, for example, in cafes, at airports. So we hope to contribute to this debate and to these discussions. And I think that's it for today. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions about this research, feel free to contact us.